Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Zuckerman, author of the Book of Jeremiah and founder of Literary Modiin, and welcome to our January event. 3 months ago, exactly on October 7th, our lives were forever changed, and now we are here on day 93, waiting and praying for all 132 of our hostages to return home, hostages who have not left our mind for 1 minute. And I'll say a few more words about the war at the end of the session, but for now, I want to turn to something joyful, and that is the release of new Jewish books to the world. Literary Modiin began about 4.5 years ago in Modiin in central Israel, and now it's grown into a monthly event with authors and attendees from all over the world. This is our 44th event, and we actually have another event this month, one that was rescheduled from the beginning of November, and that's a hybrid event. So if you're calling in from Jerusalem, from Israel, and you're in driving distance of Modiin, hopefully you'll come to our event at the end of the month. That's in person and on Zoom, so you can all sign up. And I'll send more info about that tomorrow. The format of today's event is that each author will speak for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. And we have a large attendance today, so everybody's on mute, but you can put your questions in the chat box. And if you have any technical difficulties, just send me a private note. So now I will introduce our first author. Nancy Ludmerer's stories appeared in Kenyon Review, Electric Literature, New Orleans Review, the Saturday Evening Post, among others. They have been translated into Spanish, read aloud on public radio, and received prizes from Masters Review, Carve, Pulp Literature, and others. Her debut collection, Collateral Damage, 48 Stories, won the 2022 Snake Nation Press's annual fiction prize, and she was actually on Literary Modiin a little over a year ago for that book. Nancy practiced law in New York City for many years while raising her son as a single mom, writing stories late at night or on weekends, and only recently turned to writing full-time. She lives in New York City with her husband Malcolm and their cat Nova, and SARRA COPIA is her new novel. And I will let you take it away, Nancy. Let me spotlight you. Go ahead.
Thank you for that introduction, Julie, and for having me here with Annie and Adam. Thank you also for the Israel Solidarity sessions you've hosted since October 7th, which have brought me and so many others comfort and a sense of connection. I'll begin with why I wrote SARRA COPIA, A Locked-In Life, followed by a bit about my research and a short reading from the book, and a few comments with which I'll close. So first, why SARRA COPIA? Julie mentioned my years of practicing law. In 2006, I was in Milan on a legal matter. After a week of depositions, our litigation team went to Venice to relax and sightsee. One Sunday morning, I left them behind to visit the ancient Jewish cemetery on the Lido. On an earlier trip, I'd gone to the ghetto, but I'd never been to the cemetery. I was the sole visitor, and the caretaker gave me a pamphlet in English and led me to the graves of some of the better-known residents. There I first saw the gravestone of SARRA COPIA Sulam. I was reasonably well-versed in Jewish literature and culture, yet had never heard of her. I could make out the worn Hebrew inscription. It said that the angel of death hurled his dart and mortally wounded her. It said she was wise among women, but I still didn't know who she was until I read the pamphlet, a rather quaint pamphlet, which described Sarah. It was actually put together in 1981. Quote, resting in the cemetery next to her father, who had encouraged her gifts, and her little daughter, who had predeceased her. With her lively talent and great culture, she was a recognized poetess and conversationalist, as well as the guiding light of a literary salon in her own drawing room during the first half of the 17th century. I thought, a literary salon? A poetess? A 17th century drawing room in the ghetto? A father who encouraged her gifts? There, standing beside her grave, I promised Sarah I would write about her. 15 years later, in early 2021, I began researching and writing the work that would become SARRA COPIA, A Locked-In Life. Why did it take so long? Although I prefer to say, like, why now? By then, I had been retired from the practice of law for 3 years. My collection of flash fiction was making the rounds. And perhaps most important, I had my first experience writing historical fiction. My story, The Loneliness Cure, was in Best Spiritual Literature, and I had completed it around this time and had begun sending it out. That story is based on the life of another remarkable Jewish woman, Hannah Rachel Verbermacher, who as a teenager in Ukraine in the early 1800s had the chutzpah to study Torah and Talmud and become a Hasidic Rebbe with her own small shul. After writing that story, I decided I wanted to continue to write historical fiction about little known or unknown Jewish women who had done something remarkable. In January 2021, I began my research. My first find was a trove of 17th century documents that had been translated into English by the late Don Haran of Hebrew University and by Lynn Lara Westwater at George Washington U. The documents included Sarah's father's will, the manifestos Sarah wrote in her defense after she was publicly accused of heresy by a member of her salon, and over 50 letters written to her by an elderly Catholic poet she never met. Although the poet's letters occasionally discussed poetry, mostly they urged SARRA to bathe her blonde tresses in baptismal waters, essentially urging her to convert, scolded her for responding that in that case the poet should get circumcised, and engaged in sexual banter, writing that where the beautiful Sarah was concerned, and he had heard from others how beautiful she was, quote, igniting old wood does not require much effort. I've included excerpts of these documents in the novella, all used, I must add, with permission. Another unexpected gift of my research was realizing just how thin the historical record is. Sarah's mother is hardly mentioned, except in her husband's will, in which his respect and trust in her and their daughters is apparent. In the novella, she and Sarah have a sometimes stormy relationship. Sarah's sister, Diana, gets about 3 sentences in the sources, yet the sisters' relationship is critical in the book. As for Sarah's loyal husband, Jacob, little is known about him, but I had fun crafting the first meet-cute scene I'm aware of, set in the Venice ghetto in the early 1600s, where Sarah flirts with him over a book by Galileo. A limited historical record provides wonderful opportunities for a fiction writer. More is known about Sarah's father, Simon Copio, primarily from his will, where his humanity and charity and sometimes even humor shine through. The will begins, I, Simon Copio, know there is nothing more certain than death, nor more uncertain than its hour. He was one of the most successful merchants in the ghetto and also had a loan bank. His will contains 2 notable restrictions, among others. First, that with the exception of an annual donation to the poor Jews in the Holy Land, all funds must remain in Venice. And second, that in order to inherit, his daughters must remain Jews. I'm going to read a few short passages, starting with the opening chapter, and then offer a brief conclusion. The book is in Sarah's voice and begins when she is 8 years old. March 29, 1516, the date they locked us in. Over 75 years before I was born. Every night from sunset to sunrise, the Jews must be confined. 2 heavy wood doors, dark and streaked with moisture, reinforced with iron bolts, keep us in. 1 door on the ghetto side of the bridge, the other opening onto the rest of Venice. Today is my 8th birthday, February 13th, 1600, and I'm feeling more important than perhaps I have a right to. Father is allowing me to go with him into Venice proper, yet still I want to linger in bed, eyes closed, imagining the day ahead, a day like no other. 4-year-old Diana tugs my hand, shakes my shoulder, and whispers, Sarah, come on. By the time the Marangona bell sounds from San Marco, we are dressed and ready. Slowly, the doors creak open. My sister and I race up the bridge and gaze into the murky canal, the brownish green moss, swaying far beneath us. Father joins us, smartly dressed. He wears even his yellow hat with flair. Father pats Diana's curly head, tells her one day it will be her turn, and then he and I walk hand in hand to the traghetto stop. I turn and wave to Diana before she disappears from view. I hope she does not spend the day moping. From the traghetto, Father points out the sights, the ornate facade of this church, the unusual spires of that one, the shiny-eyed red mullets arrayed in the Rialto fish market stalls alongside lemons as big as a man's fist, the sculpted faces adorning the newest bridge made of limestone, each face sadder than the next, except for one smiling visage. Perhaps the face is smiling in honor of your birthday, Father says. I know he is teasing, but the thought pleases me nonetheless. On our return, we pause in Piazza San Marco to look up at the clock tower with its signs of the zodiac, its sun and moon, its gilded lion. I name the lion Aryeh. I tell Father I will invent exploits for Aryeh. Father says I have a good imagination. Now we must go. Subito, he says. It is nearly curfew. It is my favorite room in our home, 4 flights up. A terrazzo floor and wooden rafters, high ceilings, large casement windows. The other rooms are low-ceilinged and cramped, having been subdivided horizontally to accommodate new families, refugees fleeing the Inquisition. 8 floors in a building that used to have 3. By now, the Senate has realized its mistake in confining the Jews to this narrow strip, this northernmost blasted island. The Jews build upward and cast their Jewish gaze on Venice from their tenement windows. A solution is found. A solution, Father says, is always found. Laws are passed, walls must be made higher, windows blacked out, balconies bricked up. But the new laws are not strictly enforced, at least not right away. Father teaches me in that favorite room, when the low sun through the windows gives everything a patchy red glow. We sit beside one another on a velvet upholstered bench, or he sits in his leather chair and I cross-legged at his feet. Father teaches me mathematics from account books, tutors me in astronomy and science, insists I learn Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, as well as Venetian. If an ignorant tradesman from Zante can learn, so can you. In this next excerpt of a scene, she's 14. July 20th, 1606. In a crowd of pilgrims, I gaze at the ceiling of the cupola. Throughout the basilica, but especially here, mosaics gleam, gold and more gold, glimmering halos, everything heralding the Savior. Although there are Hebrew prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Malachi, they appear as Christian icons. I am not sorry I have come, but grateful my yellow hood remains hidden under the folds of my black velvet cloak, black velvet being a forbidden fabric for Jews. Sometimes, as Father says, rules must be broken. For the moment, I appear like one of them. Earlier, when I told Father where I was going, he said, "You will return stronger." He believes all knowledge is sacred. Moreover, he says it will be useful when I establish a salon in the ghetto, a place where men and women, Christian and Jew, can share their poetry, their philosophy, their music. He always says, when you establish a salon, SARRA. Mother, if she overhears, invariably adds, "You mean if she does. Perhaps when she is older, she will find a better use for her time." Father grows thinner and frailer each day. His skin is bluish white and almost translucent, and his breathing is noisy and labored. Tonight, I prepare his favorite dish, one he can still eat, braised fennel, soft as velvet. When finished, he puts down his napkin and asks what I saw today. Sarah's father was a true idealist. Here are a few lines from the book about what the salons were often really like. The men love me to praise their words, laugh at their wit, extol their wisdom, admire their melodies. But when I ask questions about some turn of phrase or precept or musical line, they sip their coffee and pretend to be puzzled, as if I were speaking a foreign language or had uttered some blasphemy. Better I should play the lute to accompany their verses and keep such thoughts to myself. Often I am the only Jew, invariably the only woman. On religious matters, I am outnumbered and outmanned. Nonetheless, I hold my ground. Because I am the host, I read my poems last. When it's my turn, one or the other asks, "Now, beautiful enemy of Jesus, will you grace us with your little scratches?" And now a moment for my concluding little scratches. In addition to my research about SARRA, I did extensive research on Venice and its Jews. Often The Merchant of Venice, first published in 1600 and probably written a few years earlier. 1600 is when SARRA's story begins, and often the Merchant of Venice was mentioned. The contrast between Sarah's relationship with her father and that of Shylock and Jessica is stark. Yet Venice's poisonous anti-Semitism and the desire to convert the Jews, both featured in the novella, are all too familiar to us from the play. On September 29th, I wrote to Philip Skelker, who lives in England and co-directs a program called Authors in the Schools there, under the auspices of London's annual Jewish Book Festival. The program supports authors going into classrooms and sharing their work, either digitally or in person, with high school students. In my email, I described my novella and suggested it might be of particular interest to students studying the play. He wrote back that Sarah's story might well, in his words, have a transformational impact on the students' experience of Merchant, which is part of the standard curriculum in the UK. He said he was in Israel visiting family through Sukkot and Simchat Torah, and would get back to me about where to send the book upon his return to England. Immediately after October 7th, I wrote to him that I was praying for his and his family's safety, adding that there was no need for him to write back to my message. Nonetheless, he did. He wrote how much he and his wife appreciated my note. He added that flights had been canceled. He wasn't sure when he would get home. He asked me to send him a PDF of the book. I'll close with an excerpt from the email Philip Skelker sent me on Friday, October 13th from Israel, where he was staying near Haifa. Dear Nancy, I spent 2 very happy hours reading SARRA COPIA, A Locked-In Life, almost immediately after the World Wide Web delivered the novella on Wednesday. Happiness derived from the richness of the characterization of Sarah and her family, and the conviction and ease with which you present her limited world. In Sarah's father, Simon, you have created a loving, intelligent, and resourceful merchant of Venice. Sarah is locked in, her worth ignored and unrecognized by the guests at her salon. From childhood on, she's excluded and undervalued by all except Rabbi Leon de Modena, who's a character in the book, and her family. Nonetheless, her spirit never falters. Her spirit never faltered. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great. That was great. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our next author. Annie Kantar's work has appeared in the American Literary Review, Barrow Street, Bennington Review, Cincinnati Review, Painted Bride Quarterly, Tikkun, and many other places. Her translation from the Hebrew of With This Night, the final collection of poetry that Leah Goldberg published during her lifetime, appeared with the University of Texas Press and was shortlisted for the Alta Translation Prize. The recipient of an Academy of American Poets Prize and Fulbright Scholarship. Her literary translation of the Book of Job, commissioned by Koren Publishers, appeared in 2021. And Means to Be Lucky is her new poetry collection. She lives in Jerusalem. So, Annie, I'm going to spotlight you. And you should take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy, for the opportunity to read. And sorry, Julie, We just heard from Nancy. Thank you, Julie, for this opportunity and for organizing this. And Nancy and Adam, it's good to meet both of you. As Julie mentioned, my recent book of poems is called Means to be Lucky. It came out in June 2023 with Poets and Traders Press. It's a press that's associated with the New School in New York. And as the name of the publisher might suggest, all of the books that Poets and Traders publishes, Traders, Traitors, are books that incorporate the original poetry of the poet, as well as translations that the poet has made of other poets. And so in the constellation of these poems, Means to be Lucky, the book Means, of course, refers to both a noun and a verb. Noun in the sense of what is the means by which, the way we become lucky in life, so to speak. Is it providence? Is it fortune? Is it chance? Also, is it fair? Is it good? And how does it happen? And I think more importantly for me is also the means as it works as a verb. What does it mean to be lucky in that? What is the significance of whatever luck it is that we have in our lives? And what, as part of that significance, is incumbent on us in turn? The first poem that I'll read is an invocation of sorts. It's a beloved poem by one of our most beloved poets in Israel, Leah Goldberg, a poet, as Julie mentioned, that I translated and published in 2011 with University of Texas Press. And, Leah Goldberg, she wasn't a conventionally religious person in any way, although perhaps this is one of the most deeply felt and feeling religious poems that I have ever encountered. Those of you who are familiar with Hebrew poetry might know this poem. Actually, Leah Goldberg's poems have been set to hundreds of melodies that you can hear if you just turn on the radio here. This poem is called Poems Where the Road Ends. Teach me, Lord, to bless and pray before the secret of a withering leaf, the glow of ripening fruit, this freedom to behold, feel, exhale, to know, to wait, and fail. Teach my lips a blessing, a song of praise, in the freshness of your hours, morning and evening. My day to day won't seem like any of the others or subside into routine. This is a poem of wonder, and it's not a distanced sense of awe, but an often an overwhelming and bewildering desire to respond. And you'll notice too in this poem that Goldberg's response, that overwhelming desire to respond, is something I can very much relate to, and it might be why I connect, one of the reasons I connect with her poetry so deeply. Her response isn't first to bless, but rather to ask God to teach her to bless. And I think that it's our birthright, but also one of the quickest things that we forget as we get older. But sometimes, the desire to respond arises not only from something beautiful and not only from stepping out of the routine, whether intentionally or not, but also from a painful or frightening event. And the occasion for this next poem is my daughter's response to a video that popped up on the computer screen when I wasn't home. She was quite a bit younger. She's now 14. At the time, she was 4. You'll see in the poem that actually, you won't see because you don't have the book in front of you, but I will mention that there are 2 quotes. There's a quote from James Baldwin midway through, and also from the prophet Isaiah. Both of them, though, I would say are worthy of the name prophet. Beside herself. Beside herself, she is our youngest. She speaks of faces revolving in turnstiles, heads between bars chucked live from severed necks onto the assembly line. Wings, feathers, knock-kneed tossed into the packing area as if out of the air. There are laws that forbid this, religious and otherwise. Precisely at the point where you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society. But there are bunkers I don't want to be in. Please, if you kill them, don't use those machines. She's learning to read. In the video, she wasn't meant to see metal poles through ribs, wings slapping snapped necks. The law, like her, couldn't care less how pure your heart. Please use machines that don't hurt, she dictates for the letter we write. And that is why my daughter is lucky. When you see the naked, the prophet says, clothe them. He doesn't say, feel bad. The law she lays down is transitive. Don't hurt. As this poem suggests, when it comes to luck, one of the questions that most haunts me is ethical in nature, really. What kind of life do I want to live? Must I live? What kind of person do I want to be? Adrienne Rich, the poet, I used to go to the public library in junior high school, pull out all the poetry books that they had. And I read somewhere back in high school, she said, I used to believe poems could teach me how to live. And at the time I thought, well, yeah, of course. Why do I read poems? And it's funny because I've never really gotten over that feeling. And certainly not from a didactic perspective, but by the way that poems evoke and enact what's true, and truth being often very ambiguous, ambi as in both, right? Not as in it can be anything, either or, but it's many things at once, simultaneously. And in contrast, perhaps to my then 4-year-old daughter in that poem, we live in a time that tends to care, I think, first what you think and what you believe, and how you feel about something. And throughout the book, I take issue with that isolation of belief from action. Maybe the most dangerous enactment of that ethos could be ideology, which of course there's no paucity of in our age, and certainly not in this region where I live. And this next short poem is a meditation on that. Ideological. I snail swallow whole a twig, and the twig slide down its snail-like body, for it was still a snail, though it had swallowed something one could follow, it seemed, all the way down. Now back to the ethical question. Of course, one can't exclude the broader reality, also a political one in which I live. I can't exclude it, at least. And the next poem relates to a village called Walaja. It's about 20 minutes from where I live in West Jerusalem, a Palestinian village. It suffers from home demolitions. And these homes get identified through a very cruel, bureaucratic system. But of course, the underpinnings are political. And this poem is a portrait of a friend of mine from that village. it was inspired by her showing me a demolition order that she had gotten over a video call. She wanted to verify it was what she thought it was, even though it was written in Arabic and in Hebrew. But she wanted to. And this poem tries to reflect my bewilderment at the situation and pain, but also my wonder and admiration for this friend and her dignity before such unfairness and loss. The poem, those of you who tend to engage in poetry, you might recognize the poem by E.E. Cummings, Spring is Like a Perhaps Hand. That the poem also takes its cues from that. The demolition order. The demolition order, which comes out of nowhere, arranging her face, a window into which people look, though don't see, arranging, changing, placing a perhaps paper in her hand. A same thing, can you? And known. Read this here? Changing everything carefully. She can't quite believe. It's like a hand in a window. She herself can read the writing carefully to and fro, moving old things on the wall, while the words stare with no reprieve through freshly cut windows, moving a perhaps fraction of a flower here, the bulldozer dropping fixtures in a pile of crushed cement and jasmine, an inch of air, room atop room, while my friend, whose home it is again, who throws her head back when she laughs, whose daughters are watching her, sets the long plastic table for dinner without breaking anything. The last poem I'm going to read reflects on maybe what for me it most means to be lucky. I think we're lucky when we look, when we're able to notice and pay attention, and especially when we can do that with others. And this last poem reflects on that kind of attention that leads to, often can lead to, a feeling of amazement. Inasmuch as poetry is always a translation of our given world, this poem endeavors such a translation. It moves between the palpable and the mysterious, the living and the dead, and as well here between Hebrew and English. It opens with a quote attributed to Rothko. Besides that, I don't think you need any other information. Okay. Transparent. First, silence is so accurate. Yet, I wonder, the kids' room at night, stilled by their breathing, weaving the air. Isn't that the precision I'm after? Take this morning, the bath sledge, cinnamon, vanilla planifolia, lang lang, cocos nucifera, now and then limonene, essence of geranium, rosemary leaf, aqua, steam. Or the instant someone long gone I love glides into the room on a wave of perfume. And I remember the Hebrew word for scent, reach, differs by just one letter from spirit, ruach, as though a single strand of the yud had nestled down inside the middle vav. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm going to introduce our final author. Adam Mansbach is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Go the Fuck to Sleep, as well as the novels Rage is Back, The End of the Jews, which won the California Book Award, An Angry Black White Boy, and the memoir in verse, I Had a Brother Once. With Dave Barry and Alan Dweeble, he co-authored For This We Left Egypt, and the best-selling A Field Guide to the Jewish People. And his books for young readers include the New York Times bestseller Just Try One Bite and the award-winning Jake the Fake series, co-written with Craig Robinson. He's also a screenwriter, and he's been a founder of a hip-hop journal, professor of fiction, and a drum tech. He lives in Berkeley, California, and his new novel is The Golem of Brooklyn. So, Adam, take it away.
All right. So, in Jewish folklore, a golem is a humanoid creature 9-10 feet tall, made of mud or clay, always created by a rabbi or a scholarly and learned man, always at a time of immediate crisis to defend the Jewish people. Although recipes for the creation of the golem differ, and no one can agree on precisely what incantations, prayers, and rituals are required, the final step in animating a golem always involves the Hebrew word for truth, which is either written on the golem's forehead or written on a piece of paper, which is then inserted into the golem's mouth. At this point, the golem comes alive. Although, strictly speaking, the golem is never alive or dead. The golem is merely up and about or a pile of inchoate matter. The golem proceeds to follow the orders of its creator, or it does not. The folklore is rife with tales of golems who fail spectacularly, disobey, bumble their assignment. Most frequently, the assignment involves the martial defense of the Jewish people, as was the case with the Golem of Prague, generally considered the Michael Jordan of golems, but can also be something as simple as physical labor, which was the task appointed to the Golem of Helm, the Scottie Pippen of golems. When the golem's work is done, the aleph is erased from the word truth, turning the word truth to the word death, and the golem deactivates, deanimates. The golem of Brooklyn is a little different. First of all, he is not created by a scholarly or wise or observant man. He is created by a regular schmuck, an art teacher named Len Bronstein in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, who is not so much in need of a golem as he is in possession of a large quantity of clay and extremely stoned. So he creates this golem in the absence of an immediate crisis. There's no emergency to speak of. It's a lazy Saturday afternoon. And this 9.5 foot tall, 400-pound golem comes to life and immediately starts screaming at Len in Yiddish, which is a language Len does not speak or understand, and trashing his apartment. Len manages to calm the golem down by parking him in front of a television set, which is playing an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he runs out into the neighborhood in search of a Yiddish speaker to translate for him. The only person he can think of is a woman who works at a nearby bodega, who he's never spoken to, but who he once heard curse out some yeshiva kids who came in to try to buy cigarettes in Yiddish. So he sets out to try to convince this complete stranger to come back to his weird apartment and translate for him. What we will eventually learn about the golem when he, in fact, learns to speak English by binge watching Curb Your Enthusiasm for about 15 hours after accidentally ingesting a large quantity of LSD, is that the golem is a creature in possession of an ancestral memory. And this is, again, an intervention on my part. The golems of lore do not possess much of a consciousness and do not have memories. This golem, it turns out, is the only golem. There has only ever been one golem, so he's not made as much as remade. And he remembers every previous iteration of himself. he is in some sense a repository of Jewish history and trauma, which are, of course, two words that are practically synonymous. And he remembers previous adventures in 5th century Babylon and ancient Egypt and 11th century Spain. And what he's been screaming at Len, among other things, is, where's the crisis? It's inconceivable to him that he's been called into duty in the absence of a task to perform. And we also learned that the last time the Golem appeared on the planet was in Kiev, Ukraine in 1941, when he was riddled with machine gun bullets and thrown into the Babin Yar Gorge along with 33,000 other Jews who were murdered in a 36-hour period at that time. He has not been seen since. And in some sense, there's the suggestion in the book that the kind of scale of horror endemic to the Holocaust rendered the services of a large mud goon irrelevant. And that's why he hasn't been made since. But he's back now. And he keeps asking where the crisis is. So as Len and Miri, the woman from the bodega, who it turns out grew up in a nearby Hasidic sect, which she left at 18 because Miri is gay, and that didn't really fly in that community. The two of them embark on this kind of rollicking adventure road trip as the Golem searches for some meaning, you know, to a, what's the expression, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So the Golem is like, who is trying to kill the Jews? Eventually, after several adventures, Miri shows the Golem on her phone footage of the 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right, Tiki Torch, Jews will not replace us marchers, and is like, these guys, that's who's trying to kill the Jews. And the Golem is like, all right, now we're getting somewhere. Where are those guys? And it so happens that in a couple of days' time, there's going to be a rally called the Save Our History's Future Rally in a town called Wagner, Kentucky, which I made up. Kentucky is real. That's going to attract a similar cross-section of the extreme right. So the Golem demands to be taken there. So the three of them embark on this road trip. And only when they're about halfway to Kentucky does it occur to Len and Miri that they have no real conception of what the Golem intends to do when they get there. So they pull over in the middle of West Virginia, spill out of a stolen SUV that they're driving that used to belong to the Grand Rebbe of it's a long story. They pull out of this SUV and they're like, you're just gonna scare them, right? And the Golem is like, no, the Golem gonna kill everybody. And they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. That's bad business. If you won't listen to us, like, there's got to be somebody you listen to. Who can we call? The Grand Rebbe, Waleed, who gave you the acid, Larry David? The Golem's like, might listen to Larry David. They're like, well, we can't actually get Larry David on the phone, but Miri manages to find Larry David's manager's number on the internet. So they cold call him from this parking lot in West Virginia. Like, listen, you don't know me. I'm standing in a parking lot in West Virginia with a 9.5 foot tall, 400-pound Golem, and he's going to kill hundreds of anti-Semites, and the only person who might be able to stop him is Larry David. Larry David's manager is like, I love it. Pitch it just like that. Hold on, let me get Larry on the line. So Larry David engages on a Zoom call with them, and they explain the situation to him. Larry's like, you mean those Jews will not replace us pieces of shit? Yeah, no, he should kill as many as possible. The Golem's like, see? Len and Miri can't be a part of this. They split up. Eventually, they all make their way to Kentucky after several more adventures and flashbacks. And Len and Miri find themselves facing off on opposite sides of a kind of ethical, moral, existential dilemma, which is as follows. They can allow the Golem to run amok and slaughter the enemies of the Jews, in which case they might be safe. But in which case, on some fundamental level, they also may no longer be Jewish. The attempt to defend the thing that they hold dear may in fact have rendered them so far from it, so anathema to the deepest values and ideas embedded and embodied in that Judaism, that in winning the battle, they may have lost the war. That's option one. Option two is that they kill the Golem. And this is sort of the standoff that they find themselves grappling with by the conclusion of the book. So I'm going to read a little bit from an early chapter. This is the chapter in which Len goes out seeking to convince this stranger to help him translate for the golem. This chapter is like maybe the fourth chapter in the book, and it was a turning point for me in the writing because I'd been in Len's point of view. I knew I was going to be in Miri's point of view, but I needed eyes on both of them in this chapter. I didn't want to be in Len's perspective. I wasn't ready yet to be in Miri's perspective. Then it occurred to me that I could solve this problem by having this chapter told from the perspective of the cat who lives in the bodega where Miri works. For those of you who are not familiar with New York City, there's a culture of bodegas, corner stores. They're the lifeblood of many neighborhoods. And many of them, for reasons that no one fully understands, feature a cat in residence, a cat who lives in the store. And this chapter is told from the perspective of Adolfo, the bodega cat. And the name of the chapter is #RealBodegaCat. The bodega cat's name was Adolfo, although he hated what that term had come to represent. Typical New Brooklyn bullshit. These people moved here from their windswept cultural wastelands and started fetishizing all the quotidian New Yorkers took for granted, pointing their iPhone cameras at whatever drabs of grit and quirk the city had left and turning it all to kitsch. For the first 15 years of his life, nobody had paid Adolfo the slightest mind. Maybe if he was lying on top of the bread, a custy might say, "Yo, Poppy, you think you could move?" But if he pretended to be asleep, they usually just bought some Little Debbie snack cakes instead. Now he couldn't get through a single day without some millennial taking a selfie with him so she could tag it #RealBodegaCats or #SpreadLoveIt'sTheBrooklyn or whatever the fuck. These people deserve death. And if Adolfo hadn't been so old and fat, he would have sliced every last one of them to ribbons and feasted on their intestines. The Brooklyn way. The door dinged and Adolfo looked up from the stack of 4-day-old New York Posts on which he was lounging to see goofy-ass Len Bronstein step inside. The sweat stains beneath the arms of his t-shirt nearly fused to the one spread across its chest like continents trying to reform Pangea. Dude was probably stoned as usual. Good for him. Adolfo couldn't even remember the last time Farouk and Bassam, the twin brothers who owned this place, had hit him off with any catnip. Like he had anything better to do than get blazed out of his skull and watch the block gentrify and the world burn. Those dickheads had a lot of nerve, naming him after their Dominican Coke Connect and then letting him languish sober as a fucking labradoodle. Bronstein beelined for Miri at the counter, the lone woman and the sole non-Yemeni the twins employed, not to mention the only person who ever bothered to freshen his water or hook Adolfo up with a handful of plantain chips or a 5-hour energy drink. She never tried to pet him either. They had a mutual respect thing going on. But that didn't mean Adolfo didn't peep her style. He compiled jackets on all the workers out of sheer boredom, and Miri was the most intriguing of all. To Adolfo, and what did he know? He was just a fucking cat. Miri seemed like she was perpetually figuring out how to be normal, or playing catch up from 5 seconds behind because she was too distracted by something looming and horrible to really pay attention. There was often a tiny envelope of silence when she spoke, like she was double checking her words first, even when the conversation was a mundane one, as 99% of custy counter exchanges were. She wore the same gray cardigan almost every day and watched reality TV shows with rapt focus as if she were an extraterrestrial cramming to pass as a native of this stupid planet. She lived in the single room upstairs, which Farouk and Bassam only rented to employees because you had to use the bathroom in the back of the bodega, full of dirty mops and stacked cases of Arizona iced tea. "Hey," said Bronstein, "you speak Yiddish, right?" Miri didn't answer right away. This conversation was the other 1%. Adolfo hopped down off his stack of newspapers. "Sorry, I was in here one time and these 2 Hasidic kids tried to buy cigarettes and you I don't know because I don't speak Yiddish, but it seemed like you cursed them out or something and you definitely didn't sell to them and they took off running practically." Adolfo's eyes widened. How had he slept through that? I speak Yiddish, Miri said at last. I grew up. The envelope of silence came mid-sentence this time. I speak Yiddish, she finished. Cool, cool, Bronstein said, as if she'd asked him to reverse describe himself in 2 words. So I've kind of got this situation. I need a translator at my place, like 8 blocks away. Miri stepped all the way back from the counter. Better tighten it up, bro, Adolfo thought. Sorry, this is coming out weird. I need some help. I'll pay you for your time. Miri grabbed the cordless phone. Please leave, she said. It's my grandfather, Bronstein explained. He hit his head and now he's only speaking Yiddish. I just want to calm him down. So call a doctor. Do you know one who speaks Yiddish? Miri hesitated for a moment, then said, I can't leave the store, but if you bring him here, I'll try to help. Bronstein's eyes flicked left, right, left. Liar, Adolfo thought. Avu is mein schmack, he blurted. What does that mean? Miri stared at Bronstein for a long time, then said, it means, where is my dick? Oh, shit, said Bronstein, as if this made perfect sense. Miri narrowed her eyes just slightly, her most cat-like and thus most attractive move.
Good thing you went first.
Where is his dick? She asked. He's not really my grandfather, said Bronstein. Adolfo could see his right hand fisting and unfisting rapidly at his side. He's a golem. I didn't know I was supposed to make him a dick. No wonder he's mad. A golem, Miri repeated. Adolfo didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it, so inflectionlessly that it was somehow all inflection, made him feel certain that Miri was going to walk off into the night with this damp, untruthful stranger. He couldn't let that happen. He had to warn her. Adolfo meowed at the top of his lungs, then brushed past Bronstein, summoned all the hops he had left, and leapt onto the counter, 4 feet off the ground, something he had not done since the Bloomberg years. Miri ignored him, followed Bronstein out the door, and locked it behind her. So Adolfo did the only thing he could. He took a nap. Thank you. That's it.
It's great. Thank you very much. Okay. Before we get, well, while you're thinking of your questions, I mean, it's a little weird for me to do this after that reading, but I do want to just say prayer for the captives. While you're thinking of your questions, or read along with me, then we'll bring everybody back onto the screen. So this is a version that was written by Rav Goren. It's not the exact one we have in our Sidurim here in Israel, but I kind of like it. So you can read along in the English or the Hebrew, like. מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב משה אהרון דוד ושלמה ויברך וישמור ויצילו את בנינו וביתנו היקרים חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל ושאר הלוחמים והלוחמות למען ביטחון העם והארץ ואזרחים זקנים וצעירים נשים גברים וטף נמצאים בצרה ומצוקה ונתונים משיסה וסכנה בשבי. הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם לקיימים ולחזקם ולחיות רוחם ותקוותם להציל ממסגר נפשם להוציאם מצרה לרווחה ומשעבוד לגאולה ולפצועים שבהם ישלח אדוני רפואה שלמה מן השמיים רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף יזכו כולם לשוב במהרה לביתם ולארצם בריאים ושלמים לחיים ולשלום יקיים בהם דברי הכתוב לחבוש לנשברי לב, לקרוא לשבויים דרור ונאמר אמן. So, stop my share and I hope and pray that by tomorrow really, or by tonight, they will all be returned, and certainly by the next Literary Modiin event, so I don't have to keep reading this. And, well, that's not the main reason I want them to come. Anyway, back to our authors tonight. I'm gonna put everybody up on the screen, add their spotlights, and where'd you go? Lost Adam. Hang on a sec. While you're thinking of your questions. Oh, there you are. Okay. Spotlight. Okay. I think there are a few questions in the chat. Okay. First two are for Adam. Ellen has asked, and I know she asks this every time. She likes to bring people to her Brandeis study group, but she needs to have the books in paperback and with a study guide. So maybe you could all answer that question for her if your books have a study guide or are in paperback.
Is that for me?
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, paperback original, which was a decision that we made specifically so the book would immediately be available and affordable for study groups, book clubs, curricula. It's one of the things the publisher got right this time, unlike, like the publisher doesn't always get everything. Like sometimes, for example, with this book, their big marketing plan, they were like, we're going to publish the book just in time for the Jewish high holidays. And I was like, that doesn't mean what you think it means. Like Yom Kippur is not like the day when everybody goes out to buy presents. Like, sometimes they have to have stuff explained to them. This book came out very quickly by publishing standards, like 9 months after I sold it. And this was because they felt that the book was like very timely. And I didn't have the heart to explain to them that like anti-Semitism would still be around in the spring,
We could have used a golem here on October 7th, I gotta say. Okay, Nancy, Annie, do you want to answer that question?
The book is available in paperback and it's very reasonably priced. Even at the full price, it's $12.95, and if book groups are using it, I'm giving a discount off that. It is going to be available in libraries. It's a little bit of a slower process. Some libraries already have it. I know in California, the Jewish Community Library there has it, and the JCC, and it is expanding to other libraries as well. Study guide, I'm not sure yet, but the publisher has spoken about it. So I will be in touch with the publisher this week and ask about that. And I can maybe report back and to you, Julie, and you can include. Thanks.
Mine is also in paperback, and I don't have a study guide, but I'm happy to visit any book club if that would be desired.
Oh, and I should add, I'm happy to visit a book club digitally or in person. I'm in New York City.
Okay, Jan has a question for Adam. Could there be a sequel to Golem in which he goes after the anti-Semites from the political left?
Well, the thing about a golem is that he's a renewable resource. So much like the superheroes of the comic books, the golem is never dead for long. So in theory, there could be any number of sequels. In terms of the political left, I was very clear and deliberate in the target and the enemy that the golem faces in this book, because central to the praxis of white nationalism and the way that the ideology is spread and disseminated is anti-Semitism. It is hardwired, baked into that ideology, which also targets hatred of so many other groups, from immigrants to Black folks, to Arab folks, to LGBTQ folks. And I'm very clear that from an American standpoint, this is a dire and immediate and important threat. I don't feel the same way about anti-Semitism on the political left. I think there's a tremendous conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which I fundamentally do not think are in any way the same thing. I see a lot of confusion around that. I think there's been a long and very successful project to conflate those two things. A lot of money and a lot of resources have been poured into that conflation. And I think it's incredibly important to disentangle and disambiguate those two things. And in so doing, I think a lot of this anti-Semitism on the left will be revealed to be something else, i.e. political critiques of a political project. So I don't see the Golem taking the same approach with the left that he would take with the virulent white nationalists who populate much of this country.
So I didn't, I don't know if there were other questions, but I have a few questions for all of you. First, a question for Nancy. Well, it's really a question for all of you, but Nancy, you said you'd like to write about little known Jewish women. So I'm wondering if you have another person in mind for your next work, and also to Annie and Adam, what are you working on now? What do you hope to work?
I was hoping you would ask. I'm actually very well into a book about the youngest daughter of Karl Marx, Eleanor Marx, who was the only member of the family to acknowledge her Judaism. And she actually learned Yiddish so that she could communicate with the workers of the East End of London and unionize them. She was a brilliant person, homeschooled by her father and Frederick Engels. She's the first person to translate Madame Bovary into English. She translated Ibsen plays into English, and her life is really fascinating. In fact, there are a couple of really great biographies, and I decided I needed a new approach, and her nickname was Tussie because it rhymed with pussy. Everyone in this family had nicknames, and she loved cats from the time she was an infant and always had cats with her. So I am actually telling this story, which is probably going to be another novella, from the point of view of a succession of Eleanor Marx's cats. They comment on Marxist theory. They comment on life in the very chaotic Marx household. And it's been probably the most fun I've ever had working on something. So it's not a bodega cat, but it's starting with an English cat named Julia and continuing with her nephew, and then another cat along the way who's there with her when she dies. Another fascinating part of and sad part of her life. So that's my next project. Thank you for it.
I like it. I like it already. I like her already. She named Julia. Annie, do you have any poems told from points of view of a cat?
Can't say I'm allergic to cats, so that would be a big problem. But I'm working on another collection of poems, thinking about different things. One of the I kind of brood over various questions that won't leave me alone. Right now, one of them, and it starts in this book. It's in this book as well, but it's really the question of usefulness versus uselessness, and the question of why do we do this, especially when it's I mean, it seems like, well, hopefully I'll be more articulate about it in my poems, but I think we live in a society that's very in a world, particularly the West, which is concerned with the use of things. And also those of us who are committed to certain liberal values, that's part of also the bedrock, in a sense, of that philosophy. And yet I don't want to live in a world that is committed to things only because they're useful. And there needs to be room for beauty, and there needs to be room for doing things just because, when you don't have a reason, and or because you must. And so those are some of the questions that I'm thinking about and brooding over right now with my new collection.
Okay. Adam, what about you? What are you working on next? Or are you in the promotion phase?
No, I'm always multitasking. In 2024, if all goes well, I'll be directing a movie. The movie is called Boom, and it's an adaptation which I wrote of my memoir in verse, which is called I Had a Brother Once, which is largely about the suicide of my younger brother, David, and the attempts to grapple with his life and his death. The adaptation is a much more kind of compressed story than the book. The book covers maybe the last 11 years. The movie takes place all in one night, largely at a recording studio in Los Angeles. But I'm in pre-production now. I found the producers who are kind of perfect for the project. And, it's funny, like there's an adage in Hollywood that you write your way into directing, i.e. you get sick of other people being at the helm of your projects, and you try to seize control by just announcing that you're the director. So that's what I've done. And because the material is so personal and it's such an intimate story, people seem willing to actually let me do this thing. Now, I don't actually know anything about directing. So the next thing I have to do is figure out how to make proper use of this power and not run the project into the ground. But I've been on enough sets and I've watched enough people that I think I may have a handle on it. So we'll see. But it's very exciting to be even in a position to possibly make a movie based on this material, which, is near and dear to my heart.
So cool I guess you've had experience working in different genres of writing, right? Screenwriting and books for kids and books for adults and all sorts of things. But this seems like a new exciting thing.
Yeah, no, I'm excited.
That's cool. All right, good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, something Annie said just triggered a question for me about the need to have room for beauty. And for those of us who are here in Israel, and I'm sure for many of you on the call, even outside of Israel, it's just been a very, very dark, very heavy few months here, and it's not going away, and sometimes it just gets really, really depressing. And so I kind of made a little project for myself a few weeks ago. I'm like, all right, every day I'm gonna write down or think of one thing that's bringing me joy, one thing that's beautiful, and one thing that I'm grateful for, or something like that. So my question for all of you is, when you are when it's hard to find the words to write, or when you're feeling down, or what are little tricks you tell yourself, or give advice to others about how to find the words, or how to go on? Who wants to start? Who wants? Anyone?
Sometimes I'll say that I sometimes start with distraction. I'll actually look for books that make me laugh. I just Noah Yedlin's Stockholm. Well, Golem is going to be next. But I recently finished Noah Yedlin's Stockholm, which is also quite funny, and I enjoyed that. And then I have to say that I'm fortunate in that I'm really having fun with my feline narrator, so that's been helping me a lot. And so in a way, I find that writing is a positive, almost joyful distraction for me, as well as my cat Nova herself, who's
Just good.
she
Which I
didn't
assume you named before October
she
7th.
didn't come to this session, but she's occasionally out and about.
I was like, when you told me the name of your cat. I'm like, I'm not going to forget that name, Nova, because
Yeah, she came with that name to us, and she
Yeah.
doesn't seem to care for smoked salmon. So she's 9 years old. We adopted her in July, so someone named her after a star. But I'll never forget it either. And here she is to just make an appearance.
hello. Okay. Annie, Adam, what about you guys? What strategies do you have?
Please go ahead. I'll try to think of one while you answer the question.
Okay. uh, I find it's very helpful to go into nature. But then I'm very fortunate we have the Tayelet, like a promenade, which is a short walk from here, and it overlooks all of, not all, a good part of East Jerusalem. And it's just, we haven't been there for a while. And being there this time and seeing there were new flowers that were planted. We also have these funny cabbages, these decorative cabbages that they plant here in Israel. It's becoming more and more popular. It's quite funny, actually. They're like these, they're instead of flowers, but they were also just beautiful different kinds of flowers and snapdragons and and everything is so green right now. I mean, I'm from Minneapolis, so there it's cold in winter, but here, right around this time of year, it becomes green. And so going places, especially going places where, just like when when we travel, I've been noticing how my attention, I also meditate and try to practice mindfulness, and I notice how my attention is much sharper when I'm traveling, when I'm in a place that's foreign, even when I'm just speaking Arabic, which I started learning about 8 years ago. My attention is different. Parts of my mind are working that aren't otherwise working, and I'm more open also. And so, if I can go to places I haven't been to for a while, that can also be very helpful in pushing the attention to that kind of sharpness that is so pleasurable, and also, of course, is so great for writing. But that's, then there are also times where I'm just miserable and wallowing and very difficult to be around. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm miserable and difficult to be around when I'm not writing. So for me, like actively working is really a way to maintain my equilibrium, as well as a way to get away from my children, which is of 10 amount importance always. I have 3 daughters, like a farmer in a joke. So if I'm not writing, I have no plausible reason not to be parenting. My oldest daughter is a budding writer. She's 15, and I have these kinds of conversations with her all the time, which is incredible. The fact that I'm able to like talk craft with my daughter is one of my favorite things about my life. And what I end up telling her about writer's block is that in my experience, it's most often project specific. We think that we're blocked. We think that the creative process has come to a halt, but usually we're at a halt vis-a-vis a specific thing we're trying to do. So I always tell her to switch gears. Like, you're trying to write an essay and it's not working, go write a poem. You can't figure out the poem, go write a short story, take some notes, journal. Just getting the pen moving, I think, often jars us out of what we believe to be the block because it's specific to the thing that we're trying to get past. I'm terrible at taking this advice myself. I never switch gears. If I'm dealing with a problem, I stare at that problem until I'm somehow able to bulldoze my way through it. But everybody else should not do as I do.
Yeah, I have to say, the taking pen to paper, like writing in hand, by hand is a great way to get through writer's block, or just to get words on the paper. I have the whole novel in the drawer that I wrote the first draft by hand. And also I'll second that, getting into nature, going out into nature, that always helps me. Yeah, I just went for a quick little bike ride right before this event, and saw some of the first flowers, the rockefort here, so that makes me happy. All right, I know we're just about out of time, but I want to say a big thank you to Nancy, Adam, and Annie for being with us tonight and sharing your work and your words and your advice. And I want to thank all of you who are on the line. Look out for my email tomorrow with the recording and way to sign up for the January 28th event. And thank you everybody. And Besorot Tovot, as we say in Israel, which means may we hear good news soon. And that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank
Okay.
you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Adam and
Bye.
Annie, and the Soroto.